Welcome into the install with Greg Cosell of NFL Films. This is why you come to the podcast, because you've watched football this week. You've got some questions about the things that you saw, and the man in front of you, Greg Cosell of NFL Films, is here to answer them. Greg, I hope you enjoyed the first week of action as much as the rest of us did.
Oh, you know what? It's when I start watching the games and I start thinking to myself, well, now not only does it mean something that's obvious in terms of, the season and won and lost, but for me, then coming in and watching the tape, that's when I start to really enjoy it, because I know that the schemes, the tactics, how players are deployed, that's the way the coaches see things. And now I start to get excited about it. So yeah, this is it's a lot, but because I try to get through as many games as I can, Buck. But it's and early in the season it takes longer because you have to reacquaint, with personnel. Are teams using similar personnel as a year ago? Have they made a lot of changes? Who's playing in nickel? Who's playing in dime? What do they do? All those kinds of things. It just makes it take longer early.
Yeah, no, I mean, certainly for you going through, especially the amount of games that you do on a regular basis, and personnel and coaches change every year. That's why we talk about it. That's why we talked about coordinators we were keeping an eye on heading into the first week of football. But now we have some actual games to talk about. So we'll start with the Titans since we're local. And we had a lot of questions about the offense. You talked about deployment specifically and how Tim Kelly would utilize the personnel. We saw a lot of different looks, saw a lot more passes on early downs. We talked about the pony packages, Greg. Would they deploy some of them? Not only did you see it with Derrick Henry and Tajay Sharp, you saw it with Tajay Sharp and Julius Chestnut. Right. They were throwing a lot of different things out there against the Saints, and struggles from an execution standpoint. But I wonder what you thought of the scheme.
It's funny you say that, because ultimately I thought that they did some pretty good things in terms of schematics. And, it may not have shown up in terms of touchdowns in the score, but I came away feeling like, okay, I think there's truly something to build on. Now, what did surprise me, the first two plays of the game, I thought Tannehill just was not mentally sharp at all on the first two plays of the game. I mean, he threw to the wrong receiver on his first drop back. The Saints avoided the flat with their coverage, which was quarters to the boundary. The play call was something everybody has in their playbook. It was really a stick, fade, flat concept. It's a common three-man concept. And he threw the Y stick to Okonkwo, who was not open, when they avoided the flat, and Spears was wide open. And, it just struck me is that, hey, they probably practiced that. Hey, you're going to throw the Y stick. That's where we would like the ball to go. And he was going to throw the Y stick no matter what. And it just wasn't there. And then I thought that the second play, it was boot action. And he had Westbrook-Ikhine on the rail route. And that ball should have been thrown. Only Tannehill could tell you why he didn't throw it. If you look at the play, people are going to say there was pressure to some extent, but there wasn't really, Buck. That ball should have been thrown. And by the way, that might have been a touchdown.
He had several moments like that, Greg, where just missed opportunities, the missed opportunities as killer as the turnovers themselves, because I mean, the volume of targets to Hopkins was skewed in a way that, whether you want to talk about forcing the football in one direction on a regular basis, but they weren't having the success that they kept trying to go, or at least Tannehill kept trying to go back to him on. But things like the second interception that he threw, it was on first down, where he threw to Chris Moore into double coverage with Chig wide open underneath. There were just so many miscues.
Let's talk about that. Let's talk about that.
Let's please. What did you see?
Okay, I'll tell you exactly what happened there. Okay, that was the Marcus May interception. Okay, now that was a deep sail cross combination. It was a shot play. They got to, I think, the 47-yard line, and that's shot play territory, meaning that teams will call play action. They'll max pro. Often it's just a two-receiver route because you know what coverage you're going to get. You're going to get some form of three deep, so you've only got three deep defenders as opposed to four. So basically, it was a deep sail cross combination. Moore ran the deep sail. Okonkwo ran the deep crosser. Okonkwo got way too deep on his crosser, okay? So what happened when Tannehill was ready to throw the football, Okonkwo and Moore Okonkwo got so deep that he was literally next to Moore, and Tannehill did not get any kind of clear picture. He had no real definition. So Okonkwo ran his route 5 to 7 yards too deep. And therefore, he ended up throwing it deep because he had to throw it to someone, because at that moment there was starting to be a little pressure. But that's easy. As the play ended, if you looked up, you saw, oh, Okonkwo's wide open. He was not open when the ball had to be thrown, and he was much too close to Moore.
Yeah, and this is why it's important for us to do this, not just for my own perspective, but for the audience, because there's so many of these moments, Greg, that are easy to kind of overreact to or react to in real time, because everybody thought that they saw Chig wide open, and they to tell them that it's almost like telling them that their eyes are lying to them.
Right. Well, because once the ball was in the air, he clearly broke free, and it looks like, oh man, this guy's wide open. But at the time he had to throw the ball, I was sitting with one of my guys on the matchup cell, and we froze it, and kept looking and kept looking. And when he had to throw the ball, there was literally about 4 yards difference between where Moore was and where Okonkwo was. And when that kind of spacing doesn't work for a quarterback, it doesn't give them any definition.
The idea of, you mentioned Ryan Tannehill on the first couple of plays, and a general lack of mental sharpness, it seemed, from your standpoint
on those first 2 plays, for sure.
On those first 2 plays, and how much he settled in throughout the course of it. He never really looked comfortable from our standpoint, agree. Greg. And the press box in New Orleans is 1,000 feet up in the air, so you have to really wait until you can watch this thing back on television to see if you're, at least from my standpoint, to see if what I was seeing was actually what I was seeing.
Right.
But I think that, the thing for me, we talked about the preseason, and there's not a ton of value of X's and O's schematic breakdown, chess match type stuff from the preseason. But for speed of the game type stuff, even for a 12-year, a veteran quarterback heading into year 12, it seemed like there might have been some benefit to getting him out there at some point. The coaches made a decision not to. They had 2 quarterbacks behind him to try and continue to evaluate, basically, with Malik Willis and Will Levis. But it just seemed like a general lack of sharpness throughout the course of the game from him.
I would agree. I mean, we saw that in Philly as well. Hurts did not play well at all. And then after the game, Nick Sirianni came out and pretty much said, well, maybe I should have given him some snaps in the preseason. So, you just got to live with that. But he was not sharp throughout the game. He did not look comfortable. I mean, there was a sack on the 3rd play of the 2nd possession. It was a 2-man boundary route out of empty. It was a pivot route by Spears and an in-breaker by Hopkins. Hopkins was wide open. It was a 2-man concept. Tannehill got stuck on Spears. Then he moved, and then he got sacked. There were too many plays that he did not see and process things clearly. But it's funny because the interceptions were not those plays, and we could go over the other 2 if you like, but everybody's going to look at the interceptions. They were not those plays.
Well, I think we should, Greg, because I asked him, Tannehill, specifically after the game, hey, can you walk us through the picks, just because, for the same reason we talk about these things, there may be things that I miss. And he basically said, well, it doesn't matter. I turned the ball over 3 times. We lost the game.
Because that's a professional. He's not going to blame others.
And did not throughout was accountable about his performance and said, I could, but is it going to do any good? Probably not. So let's start with,
you want to go through the first one, which was Lattimore's interception. It was 3rd and 5 in the 2nd quarter. And that resulted from Granderson pass rush versus Diller. Tannehill could not step into his throw on the deep over, and he left it short. Diller did not have a good game at all. In fact, I'm being kind. He really had a tough game. The hope, of course, is that's a learning experience, but he's going to have to play stronger. I mean, he just got moved back literally on every pass rush. He lacked strength in his hand strikes and was wide and late with his hands. And Granderson in particular just kept getting into his body, but whoever it was just kept moving him back. But the Lattimore interception, he could not really step into the throw. And it would have been a tight throw, but if he was able to lay it out in front of Hopkins, it may have been a very catchable ball. So that was not really on him. And if you look at the play, which I did, of course, 10 times, he didn't have another throw there. So he actually threw it to the only guy he could have thrown the ball to, but that was not his fault. And we can get to the last one if you like.
Yes, let's.
The Adebo interception came on 3rd and 5 late in the third quarter. And that resulted from an inside stunt that was about as well schemed as, a stunt could be. I won't go into the weeds on it because people would have to see it. But the point is Davis got in clean through the A gap. And the way they set up their D line, it was beautiful. He got in clean through the A gap. Tannehill saw Hopkins one-on-one. He figures, hey, my best receiver is one-on-one versus Adebo to the boundary. I'm going to throw it there. No one would debate that. It's your best receiver one-on-one. But Davis' pressure forced a short throw because he couldn't really finish his throw, and it resulted in an interception. So, Tannehill did not play well, and I don't think he saw things clearly throughout the game, but the interceptions were not really examples of that.
Which is so funny to hear contextualized, and it's why I'm glad we're doing this, because we talked all week about Dennis Allen, Greg, or at least for a good chunk of the podcast last week about Dennis Allen and how difficult a defense that is to play against, and the horses that they've got up front specifically. And you could tell, like we know that the Titans' offensive line had question marks, to be generous, coming into this season, but you could see the ways that that unit was taking advantage of time in and time out, basically every time they drop back to pass.
Look, here's what they did. I mean, they knew that you had Dillard playing left tackle, and Dillard has somewhat of a track record in the league, and everybody knows what his strengths and weaknesses are. Hopefully the weaknesses get worked on and he becomes better. They also knew, the Saints, that you had a rookie at left guard playing a position he hasn't played in at least 3 years. Okay. So what did they do a lot of? They stunted, and they gave them major problems, whether it was a TE stunt, meaning the tackle goes forward as the penetrator and the end is the looper, or an ET stunt, which means the end goes first as the penetrator and the tackle is the looper. And they caused a lot of problems for Dillard and Skoronski. Some were the fault of Dillard. Others were just really well executed stunts that, I mean, if you're setting up, think of it this way, Buck, and hopefully people can visualize this to some degree. If you're setting up, there's a defender right in front of you, and he's your guy, and all of a sudden he starts coming at you, okay? You're prepared to block him. And then as you're prepared to block him, all of a sudden someone from outside your field of vision just drills you from the side. That's what happens here. That's what a stunt does. And, those things are hard to deal with at times.
Yeah, they certainly struggled with it throughout the course of the game. And I mean, didn't help, Greg. They had Superdome's a tough place to play. They had operational penalties. Their average third down. We talked about, trying to maintain manageable third downs. Their average third down was 3rd and 8 throughout the course of the game.
Yeah, that's not good. Now, the other thing, you mentioned something I thought was really interesting. First down passing. I mean, when was the last time, again, there may have been a time recently, but when was the last time we saw 17 dropbacks on first down?
Not in any of the last few systems, plural, that I can remember with this personnel group.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think, look, it's the first game. Tannehill didn't play. I would say Dillard is definitely a concern right now, no question, because the weaknesses that people felt that he had, which is why he did not get the left tackle job in Philadelphia, those weaknesses showed up. We're not going to sugarcoat it, and we're not going to lie about it. He really had a hard time in this game, and it was problematic. And that needs to be fixed, or they're going to have a problem. But as far as Tannehill, he is a professional quarterback. You have to assume that now that he's got his feet wet and the whole deal, that he'll play better football. But Dillard, that has to get better, or that'll be an issue.
And it'll be tough again this week, as it will every week in the NFL. The Chargers are coming in here to Nashville. They coming off a loss themselves against the Miami Dolphins, who, the offense, Greg, we talked about Miami's offense and just how crisp Tua looked in it in this first game, and the way that they were taking advantage of matchups as well. I'm certain that was probably one of your favorite games to break down this week.
Yeah, Miami. there are three offenses that I really enjoy watching in particular. It's the Niners, the Lions, and Miami now with Mike McDaniel and Tua. Obviously the Titans offense is nothing like Miami's offense in terms of concepts, but yeah, they were really fun to watch. The Chargers played a boatload of man coverage, both cover 1 and 2 man, and ultimately they got burned playing it, but they really played high percentage man coverage. As I said, the Chargers D is now playing a different offense in the Titans this week. So we'll see what they choose to do. Knowing Brandon Staley, it's not going to look anything like what he did against the Dolphins, but we'll see. And I'm curious to see how Tim Kelly, after last week, comes out this week, because to me, you want to keep playing this way. You don't want to all of a sudden say, we're done now, let's go back to just handing it off. And, I think you've spent all training camp trying to, I don't want, for want of a better cliched term, change the culture of the offense. And I don't think you want to change it after one game.
Nor do I think they will, Greg. I mean, I think, the game plan that they had in place was a successful one. It wasn't executed properly.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I'm glad to hear you say that. You're closer to it than I am. I'm just watching tape in my office. But it's easy because of the result to say, oh, terrible game plan. What are they doing? That wasn't the case at all. It was actually kind of interesting to see some of the things they were doing. I was sitting, with one of my guys who actually played quarterback in college. And he was saying, hey, they're doing some pretty good things, and they were. It just, obviously they had issues in both with the quarterback, with the protection, but, I think on a certain level, I actually spoke to a coach yesterday from a team who said something to me that I found really, really interesting, Buck. And I hadn't thought of this, and it just made me go, wow, that's really cool. He said to me, you want to play really good teams early in the season, because you want your weaknesses exposed early, because then you can really work on them. Whereas if you end up playing teams that in a sense you're better than, or that can expose your weaknesses in a true sense, then you start getting into the middle of the season and you start to feel like, hey, we're pretty good. And then all of a sudden, what hits the fan, because you start playing better teams that expose your weaknesses. And then it's harder. Because you're in season, he says, where if you can play teams early that can expose some of your weaknesses or concerns, you can address them quicker.
Greg, and the Dolphins are a team that jump into my mind from last year with some of that. Now, obviously, Tua and the concussion situation impacted them greatly, but it did feel like Mike McDaniel, teams had a plan for Mike McDaniel about halfway towards the back end of the season, and you could tell that some of the explosives were being limited. They were finding out where the spots that Tua was throwing to, or like to throw to.
And that may happen again this year. I mean, it's always a chess, that's the thing. And I'm a big believer, Buck, as we've had conversations. I'm a big believer in coaching. Obviously everybody wants great players. That goes without saying. But, when I watch certain teams, and I mentioned the Lions, the Niners, and the Dolphins, and taking nothing away from their quarterbacks, I'm not taking any, they're playing at a really high level. But when you watch those teams, you see receivers that are open. And they're open because of the way the scheme is structured and how they get people open. And now everybody's going to say, well, why doesn't everybody do that? It's like in any business, there are people that just are better than others, or that have a feel, or that the players understand it better. There's probably 20 different reasons. It's just like when a play works, I've had people say to me, well, then why don't they run that play every time if it works? You and I both know it doesn't happen like that. So now it comes down to coaching with the Titans, getting back to them. I thought they did some good things. Let's build upon it. Look, we wouldn't be sitting here saying what a phenomenal performance by everybody if Tannehill hits that flea flicker to Chig down the sideline. They probably win the game, and the tenor of our conversation would be different, but it really wouldn't change anything we're saying right now. And that's what coaches do. They know that, hey, if you get one play, it's awesome, because it's hard to win in this league every Sunday, but it doesn't change the things you've got to work on and get better at.
Yeah, it's just so hard for people sometimes. It feels like to kind of grasp that, because they immediately just see, oh, Derrick Henry only 5 carries in the second half, that's why they lost the ball, or that's why they lost the game, stuff like that. that I think fans can hyper
Well,
focus on and lose sight of the bigger picture.
you just made a great point, by the way, because ultimately, what are the Titans trying to do? Okay, they're trying to compete in the AFC, and the AFC is hard. Okay, and to compete in the AFC, forget about what happened. Week one, there's always 4 or 5 results that are just you got to throw them out.
Yeah.
The Bengals are not going to be like that all season long. I think we know that. Even Pittsburgh, Pittsburgh does not have a bad football team. They're probably not going to be like that all season. So in order to compete in the AFC, you're going to have to score points. And, I think clearly Mike Vrabel understands because he made Tim Kelly the coordinator and he knows Tim Kelly's background. And they probably had a ton of conversations in the offseason. And I guarantee Tim Kelly said to him, our whole deal is not going to be just built on handing the ball to Derrick Henry. And Coach Vrabel was okay with that because he knows you're going to have to score points. So that's why I don't think anything's going to change. They're just going to try to correct, and they'll have to deal with some issues. Look, they may have to for a while, help out Andre Dillard. They may have to do that and see, but because I don't think they want to change their offensive line. I really don't. That's not going to be the first move, and unless you go 5-6 weeks and it continues to be a major issue.
No, and if it becomes untenable, then they have
Right.
talked about it. But like they have zero interest in moving Peter Skoronski anywhere other than where he's playing right
And
now.
I don't think he played poorly in this game, by the way.
I thought for his first game out, I think they were pretty comfortable with the results. And you mentioned some of the times that they got by the Saints, but
And that's
going to happen.
Yeah, that's going to happen. I mean, the Saints. Look, the Saints have coaches too. They see 2 players, one playing a new position, the other with a clearly defined reputation, and they attack them.
Yeah.
That's what coaches do.
Well, it'll be interesting to see the chess match coming up this weekend, Greg. Chargers offense and Titans defense. Kellen Moore, the coordinator there in Los Angeles now. The running game for the Chargers, spectacular.
It was great last week. Yeah. I mean, they had a couple of long runs, but overall it was really, really good. The question I would have now is, at corner, because they've got big receivers, the Chargers.
Mm-hmm.
They've got really big receivers. So it's going to be interesting to see how they choose to play. Especially with Fulton, I mean, again, you had mentioned to me that he practiced somewhat Wednesday. We'll see with a hamstring, that's a tough situation because you don't want him to tear it and then he could be done for the season.
Yeah, he's officially listed on the injury report we just received not moments ago as a limited participant. So how they handle these Chargers, just as you mentioned, the size of the Chargers wide receiver. But what did you make of their passing game, Greg? Because they tried to get some stuff done late to give themselves an opportunity to win the game. Ultimately, weren't able to execute. And I wonder what you thought of what you saw from them.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think that they did a lot of RPOs. I think it's going to take a little time. Again, it's still a new offense.
Mm-hmm.
And the RPO, Herbert's a very smart player, so the RPO game will be a significant part of what they do because the RPO, the quarterback, bases that on numbers and alignment and leverage as to what he wants to do with the football. I think Herbert's really good at the line of scrimmage as well, getting you into the right called run based on what he sees defensively. And by the way, we didn't spend a lot of time talking about the Titans defense, and they're really good, really, really good. I mean, I'd almost just rather comment on that if I could, because please. I thought Autry was tremendous. I thought that Arden Key was really, really good. He just, the Trevor Penning kid who came out of, I think, Northern Iowa as a big, tough guy, with a lot of late hits, after plays were over. You may remember him in college. I don't know if you do or not.
No, I remember we were talking about tackles then for the Titans. He was one of the names.
Yeah, but he was one of those guys. And, it's funny how when you get beat, you don't really do that a lot because, it's a little humbling. But I thought the Titans defense played really, really well. People might say, well, Derek Carr threw for, this many yards. I think when all was said and done, it was over 300. But, there was one long pass to Olave, which was a bust. And obviously he hit the touchdown to Shaheed where Murphy Bunting was beat on that play. But for the most part, I thought this defense really, really played well. And they stun a lot too, and they're really, really good at it.
Yeah, no, I mean, Key was everything that we I think expected him to be based on what we've seen, you know, in limited sample sizes in camp and stuff like that. When they're not going 100% full speed, we knew that the Titans front was going to be a handful. And it was good to see, if you're a Titans fan, proof of concept on that, because that's something that they're going to have to lean on as long as they're healthy all year long.
Yeah, and the interesting thing, like I mentioned, is going to be if McCrary stays, outside because of the injury to because in their base and nickel, McCrary played outside once Fulton got hurt.
Mhm.
But then in their dime, Vildor played on the outside, because McCrary kind of came inside, and so we'll see how this all plays out going forward with a week of practice, especially if they feel as if Fulton will not be able to go, which I guess I'd be surprised given the nature of that injury.
I think that's going to be one of the biggest ones to watch heading into Sunday's game here in Nashville. Of course, getting ready for another week 2 slate, the NFL Matchup Show is your place to break down or have the film broken down for you with Greg, Darius Butler, and Sal Pal on ESPN on Sunday mornings, on ESPN Plus on demand. You can set your DVRs as well. It's a great resource for you. Greg, what are you focused on, or what is one of the pieces you're excited to get into, or have already started to get into this week on the Matchup Show?
Oh yeah, I mean we know what our pieces are at this point because
Because it's Wednesday.
Yeah. So I mean the games we're doing in the show are Jets Dallas, Seattle Detroit, Miami New England, Ravens Bengals, Packers Falcons, San Francisco Rams. And by the way, Matthew Stafford was phenomenal this week.
Yes.
He was really fun to watch. And we're doing Kansas City Jacksonville as well. So so those I'm particularly focusing on the Lions pass game. I'll talk about the Dolphins pass game. KC and Jacksonville played twice a year ago, so we have that, in our bank account, as it were. And the Ravens Bengals, of course, played 3 times a year ago, so we have that as well. But so I'm dealing with those games. But it's week 2 starts Thursday night with the Eagles and the Vikings.
I'm assuming that Jets Cowboys game is a Jets defense versus Cowboys offense breakdown.
Darius is doing that game, but that's what he's doing. You are correct.
Yeah, unfortunate to see the Aaron Rodgers injury. I mean, just gut punch for a fan base, for him, for that organization. It's just awful to see. But certainly,
the nature of that injury, you wonder if that's a career ender.
At almost 40, Greg, that the rehab, from what I understand, I've never ruptured an Achilles myself, but it's anywhere from a year to 18 months. It's just all of it sounds pretty grueling.
Yeah, I know, because and it's the nature, the kind of injury where it's not like he can do things, I mean, he's got to wait, it's not, he can't just go out and do stuff, some injuries you can still work out, you can, he can't do that.
Yeah, unfortunate, but football, that's the kind of stuff that the game brings, as we talk about it each week, and certainly looking forward to getting into another week of matchups. Greg, appreciate the time as always, and look forward to chopping it up with you next Wednesday.
All right, Buck, appreciate it. Thanks.